It's time for another episode of Gospel Preaching Live, brought to you by the Kearney Church of Christ, which meets at 406 North Clark in Kearney, Missouri. Make plans to come out and visit the brethren, who look forward to seeing you. And now the host of Gospel Preaching Live, Richard Dodson.
Welcome to Gospel Preaching Live. My name is Richard Dodson. I work as a minister with the Kearney, Missouri Church of Christ, and Kearney, Missouri is a beautiful place. It's known for Jesse James. If you remember the outlaw, he grew up out there. He's buried out there, according to I guess the experts. But needless to say, if I was leading to this, it's a work of the Kearney Church of Christ. If you're ever in Kearney, we'd love to have you, and we'll extend that invitation a little bit more later in the lesson. If you are watching on Facebook and YouTube, and you have any comments or questions, suggestions, whatnot, you can leave them in the comment section, and I'll be sure to check them out. There's other ways in which people can hear this lesson, and they may be listening via podcast or whatever. And you can also contact me by going to 816-686-9517. That is my phone. You can call or text 816-686-9517. All I ask is that you remember I'm in the Central Time Zone. You can also reach out by email. You can go and reach out to me by going to gospelpreachinglive@gmail.com. That's gospelpreachinglive@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from everybody, and it's always great to know that there's people listening and people who are helping me with the message to get it out. They share it, and they do what they can to help spread this word. And I sure do appreciate everybody's help. Okay, this evening's lesson is inspired to me last week. I was visiting a congregation, and they just started the song service off by singing "We're Marching to Zion." And there were some phrases in that song that really hit me. I sung that song 1,000 times, and for whatever reason, it never dawned on me. But there is like a phrase at the end of the song: "We're marching upward to Zion." And when I think about marching upward, I'm thinking, for me, that's harder than walking down. I'm not really crazy about walking up. But when the song is really, it's a comparison about our life that we live as a Christian and how we're marching to heaven. And, this was the other phrase that came up. We're walking through Emmanuel's ground. That's part of the lyrics. Meaning this is Jesus's path. This is where Jesus walked. Not that he walked it literally, but the experiences that he had while he was on earth are the experiences that Christians experience. And so it made me think about, that can be a very difficult task. And as I started thinking about the deeper meaning of the song, I thought, this is something I think I could preach on. I think there's some good points that we could glean from it, and I hope that you'll enjoy it. But I do ask that you look at the picture. If you're watching, I'll try to describe it for those that are listening on the radio. It's a narrow path, and it's going up a hill. There's grasses all around. There's different hills, but it's just a path that's going up a hill. And it's not, I wouldn't call it an easy road to walk on. It's not impossible, but it's a dirt path. It looks like it's got grass growing in the middle of it, and you could probably in places stumble if you're not careful. But that's the picture I chose to think about. If you're like me, you would look at that path and you'd think, okay, I can do this, but it's not going to be as easy as going down, but it's going to be a little bit of struggle. And when you compare that to the Christian's life, we have to look at living our life as a Christian that way. Living our life as a Christian is not easy, and it's going to be a struggle, like walking uphill, but it can be done. And so I thought we would look at the song a little bit and then start making the comparisons that would apply to our life as Christians. Now, this song, "We're Marching to Zion," just by way of a background, It was written in the late 1600s to early 7. Well, I'm not sure exactly. Isaac Watts wrote it, and he lived from 1674 to 1748. And then, of course, the tune itself was reworked by a man about 100 years later in the late 1800s. Robert Lowry is his name. And of course, the original hymn had 10 stanzas, and our songbook at church, there's only four. But that's where the song comes from. And just by way of background, if you're ever wondering about that song, we're marching to Zion, and I'm sure you may recognize it, you may not, but it goes, we're marching to Zion, beautiful, beautiful Zion, we're marching upward to Zion. Hopefully that will remind you of the song. It is a beautiful song, and of course I know I probably didn't do it justice, but needless to say, that's the song. Now, again, when we're talking about the song, it's important for us to understand some basic facts about it. And that's that word Zion. Let's start with there. We're marching upward to Zion. Where is Zion? And that's a good question because it's all over the Old Testament. Jerusalem is spoken of as being Zion. One of the best passages that's at point blank is 2 Samuel chapter 5 and verse 7. When it talks about David, he took the stronghold of Zion. And then it says the same as the city of David. Well, the city of David, that was Jerusalem. I mean, it was actually a smaller area. It's the highest hill in Jerusalem. What is that? The southern side? I'm not sure which side it is, but it got to be known for all of Jerusalem. But needless to say, that was the original. The highest hill in Jerusalem was known as the city of David, and of course, then later all of Jerusalem. But that's Zion. That's what was referred to as Zion. However, there have been prophecies made and various passages that come up in the New Testament that talk about Zion being different for the Christian. Now, it uses the same name as Zion, but its meaning is someplace else, not Jerusalem. And one passage to go for is Hebrews chapter 12 and verses 22 through 23. When it says, you have come to Mount Zion and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem. The heavenly Jerusalem. See, it tells you right there. This is Mount Zion. And to innumerable angels and festal gatherings in the assembly of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven. And then it goes on. But yes, we're talking about heaven itself. And when we think about Zion, we're thinking about a place where God meets with his people. Now, of course, in the Old Testament, he met with his people in the temple. And then, of course, he will be with those in the church in heaven. Jesus is sitting at the right hand of God. And when he comes again, that's where he'll take us to be. And so that's why we are marching upward to Zion. That's a kind of a metaphor. When we say Zion today, thinking of heaven, it's just a comparison with the in the Old Testament with those who used to march to Jerusalem to worship. If you remember Jesus's parents, they went into Jerusalem to worship. So yes, there is a time and a place for how Zion is used in the scriptures, and we just have to be able to figure out by looking at the context to see which one it is. But so just be that as it may, most of the time in the Old Testament, it's talking about Jerusalem, the city of David. But in the New Testament, there are places where it makes reference to Zion being heaven. And one thing, as I already mentioned, the city of David, the Zion, was a city on a hill. And I think that's important for us to notice too, because we're marching upward. That's part of it. Now we march upward to heaven, meaning heaven's above us. We're marching upward, going to heaven. That's the thought. But there is some comparison with that. And the comparison is that if you are going to go to Jerusalem from about any angle, you're going to walk uphill. So if you wanted to come to Zion to worship God, you're going to be walking uphill. In Psalms 2 and verse 6, Of course, this is making reference to Jesus. He said, I have set my king on Zion, my holy hill. And that's makes reference to that hill again. And Jesus used that hill in his teachings. If you look at Matthew chapter 5 and verse 14, when he told those in the Sermon on the Mount, you're the light of the world, a city set on a hill cannot be hidden. So we can see then that Jerusalem was on a hill. I mean, it was the highest point, the city of David was. And so from anywhere you walked, you would be walking uphill. And so there would be certain struggles with that. And so the comparison would be, again, that a Christian be walking to heaven, there should be certain struggles for the Christian as well. Now, I want you to look at this chart. In fact, I'm going to, for those watching on Facebook and YouTube, I'm going to blow this up so that you can get a better look at it. Now, over here, if I can get my, hopefully you can see the mouse right here, but this is the Mediterranean Sea. So that's sea level. And so if you came in by ship and you wanted to go to Jerusalem, you'd have to come all the way up here. This is Jerusalem. And that's around 2,000 feet above sea level. So you can see then, that's all uphill from there. But when they crossed over into the promised land and they crossed the Jordan River, look how high they had to go. You see, they had to go up here too. I mean, it's a big drop off to get to the Jordan River. And in fact, this is such a big steep drop. If you look over here, Mount Nebo, if that reminds you of anything, that's where the Lord took Moses so he could look into. He couldn't go into the promised land because of his rebellion, but that he had in disobeying God. But needless to say, he was able to come up here and look down into Jerusalem. But it goes to show you how high Jerusalem is. I mean, Mount Nebo is even higher, but not by an awful lot. I think about 500 feet, maybe a little more. But Jerusalem's right here. So anywhere you came, you're going to be walking up. And that's the only reason I'm showing you this now is to kind of give you an idea that Jerusalem, if you're going to go to Zion, you're going to be marching upward. Now I'm talking about the Jerusalem Zion. So we get the idea, the comparison, a struggle to walk up to Jerusalem, Mount Zion, and it was a struggle to get to the heavenly Zion as well, as we're going to see. Now, another part of that song says we're marching through Emmanuel's ground. Now, Emmanuel is that's Jesus's name, and so we understand that. I'm having a brain freeze here. I want to say it means God be with us. God's with us. I hope that's right. You may have to look that up. It's just not. My brain is not working right now for whatever reason. But needless to say, we're marching through Emmanuel's ground. Now, it is talking about Jesus. That's another name for Jesus. And so this path that we're going to be taking, this uphill struggling path, this is Jesus's path. This is the path that he forged when he was living here on this earth. And this is important. Look at John 14:6. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Remember, this is his path that we be taking. It belongs to him. Isaiah 35 and verse 8, there shall be a highway be there, and it shall be called the way of holiness, the way of holiness. The unclean shall not pass over it. It shall belong to those who walk on the way. Even as they are fools, they shall not go astray. This is that path of Jesus's that it's speaking of. And then in 1 Peter 2 and verse 21, it talks specifically that it's not talking about an actual pathway like we've shown in the beginning with that picture of that path, but it is a comparison. It's a figurative path. He says, and what it is it's following the example of Jesus. He says, for this you've been called because Christ suffered for you in 1 Peter 2:21, leaving you an example so that you might follow in his steps. Follow in his steps, meaning not actually follow where he walked, but you would follow the example that he set. And so when we're talking about, we're marching through Emmanuel's ground, We're talking about something that, yes, it definitely belongs to Jesus, but it is his example that belongs to him. And that's what we have to be following. And so, what I want to do for the rest of our time is to look at that path and look at some basic characteristics of that path, and then ask ourselves: are we marching to Zion? Are we marching upward to Zion? And remember, there's struggles along this path, and so this lesson is going to be, quite clear in showing you those struggles, and hopefully you'll be able to see that. But you'll also, most importantly, be able to compare your life with the path that Jesus is on, and then you're going to be able to say, "Hey, am I really marching to Zion?" Because we sing that song, it's important that we know we're marching to Zion. The only way you were going to know it is to know that road we're traveling. Are we on the right road? Well, the first characteristic of Jesus's road, his path, is that it was a way of selflessness. And I want you to look at Philippians chapter 2 and verse 5 through 8. And I want you to keep your Bible open to this passage, because we're going to look at a few verses before that here in just a second. He says, "Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, he did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, and being born in the likeness of men, and being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross." It's hard to imagine being God and being in heaven, being the creator. I mean, we can read in Genesis about how Jesus was there, but yet we find Jesus coming to this earth and giving that up, coming to this earth to live as a man. I mean, that's really truly a humbling thing. And the type of man he wasn't a man of means. No, he was just a son of a carpenter, and there was nothing really for anyone to look at and to be able to be jealous of him over. But that was what he did, and he did that for a reason. He wanted to practice humility. In Philippians 2:3 through 4, that's for our benefit. He says, "Do nothing from selfish ambition." Now, this is us following Jesus's example. "Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interest, but also to the interest of others." This is what we need to do in order to make sure that we're on the path that Jesus trod. If we're marching upward to heaven, then we truly are a selfless people. We're going to think more of others than we do ourselves. We're going to think more about other people's interests than we do our own. And that takes practice, but that's what Jesus did. Jesus saw the importance of you and what you needed more than what he wanted. And so he was willing to sacrifice all and to give all of himself in order to help you. And so if we're going to march through Emmanuel's ground, that has to be our mindset. That has to be our actions. That's what we need to be doing. Now, the second characteristic of this Emmanuel's ground is it's the way of persecution, because Jesus was persecuted. In John 19:1 through 3, we read how Pilate took Jesus and flogged him. Flogging was a very brutal thing. They had that, it was like a whip, but at the end of the whip, there was little pieces of metal that might dig into your skin and, pull something out. If it had to, little pieces of flesh, it was, and you can think of it as like barbed wire, or even something sharper, something like that. It's just an awful way to be flogged. But they also took a crown of thorns and put it on his head. And those locust thorns, the tips of those have a little poison on them. If you get stuck by them, they're 3 inches long. And if you get stuck by them, they leave welts. So that was not something that was very comfortable for him. But, they made fun of him by arraying him in a purple robe, and they'd spit on him and struck him and things of that nature. So, yes, he was persecuted. But And Paul told Timothy in 2 Timothy 3:12 that all who desire to live a godly life in Christ Jesus will be persecuted. So if you're marching to Zion, you should be persecuted. There should be things that are happening that you don't necessarily like, but that's part of being a Christian. You should be suffering persecution. Now, another characteristic we have is that this is the way of rejection, because you're going to be rejected when you're marching through Emmanuel's ground. Why do I say that? Well, Isaiah 53 and verse 3 prophesied about Jesus, saying he was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, and as one from whom men hide their faces. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. So yes, he was rejected by men. And John 1:11, for instance, it talked about him going back to Nazareth. It says he came to his own, and his own people did not receive him, and they didn't. It's sad to say. He went back to Nazareth and tried to preach to his people. It says in Matthew 13 and verse 57, they took offense at him. It said, but Jesus said to them, a prophet is not without honor except in his hometown and in his own household. And they were looking at him and they were like, how could this guy be so smart? I mean, we have his brothers, we have his sisters. He was the son of a carpenter. Where did he get his intelligence from? How can he do this? And so they didn't really listen to the words he had to say. They were more concerned with, who he was, and it was rejection, and he had to leave. And it's most unfortunate, but that's going to happen to Christians today as well. We have to understand that there's going to be those who reject you. Jesus said he did not come to bring peace on this earth, but a sword. And then in verse 35 and 36 of Matthew 10, he said, I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a person's enemies will be those of his own household. Think about that. That is rejection when somebody, especially in your own household, rejects you, but that happens. And I've seen that happen more than once. It's happened to me, all because of what I believe. And it's a very it's a hurtful thing to suffer rejection, but that's part of it. That's a characteristic of marching to Zion. If you're going to march to Zion, this is going to happen to you too, and you have to expect that. It's also a way of being falsely accused. I tell you, it sounds like I'm having a hard time selling Christ by going through this, but it's true. This is marching through Emmanuel's ground. And if you're marching through Emmanuel's ground, people are going to falsely accuse you. Notice what took place in Matthew 26, 59 through 60. And this is concerning Jesus. It says the chief priests and the whole council were seeking false testimony against Jesus that they might put him to death. But they found none, though many false witnesses came forward. And of course, it goes on to say they did find a couple. But yes, they were looking for false testimony, false accusations against Jesus. And he faced that constantly. That happens to Christians today. Well, a good example of this is with Stephen in Acts chapter 6, verse 11 through 13. It says that they secretly instigated men who said, we have heard him speak blasphemous words against Moses and God. Well, Stephen had not said that. And it says they stirred up the people and the elders and the scribes, and they came upon him and seized him and brought him before the council, and they set up false witnesses. And of course, it goes on talking about more about Stephen. But my point is to show you how he's being falsely accused. He was just a Christian, but he was marching to Zion. And this is part of the characteristics of marching to Zion. This is the difficult part. This is why it's an uphill road. It's not going to be an all downhill march. This is an uphill travail that you're going to have to encounter. And so you have to be ready for that. Now, it's also the way of obedience. And this will be our last one. If you're going to march through Emmanuel's ground, you have to be ready to obey. And we see that with Jesus in Hebrews 5, 8, and 9. It says, although he was a son, he learned obedience through what he suffered, and being made perfect. In other words, he did not sin. He became the source of eternal salvation to all who obey him. Those who are marching to Zion obey Jesus, no matter what. And Jesus, when he forged the road, that's part of the characteristics of it. He obeyed the Father, and no matter what. We see that in the garden when he told the Father. He prayed 3 times, "Let this cup pass from me, but let not my will be done, but thy will." He was living for the Father, and so that's what we have to do for Jesus. We have a will. There may be things that we want to do, but we have to understand Jesus's will comes first, and with Jesus's will coming first, we have to understand that we have to obey him no matter what we may desire, what we may want. We're going to have to obey Jesus. That's our first and foremost desire, is always to obey and glorify God. So I ask you to look at this path. You're marching through Emmanuel's ground as you're marching to Zion. And it is uphill because it's a struggle. If you look at the picture, if you're watching on Facebook and YouTube, I got a man who's, trying to walk up a side of a mountain. And if you've ever done that, it's hard. It's a struggle. In this case, the struggles are selflessness, persecution, rejection, false accusations, and having to obey. Those are the things that make the path hard. But now I want you to know something. The reward at the top is great. There's rewards along the way, but nothing to compare with what's waiting for us in heaven. And so is it going to be worth all this hard work to try to get to heaven? Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, it's worth a lot harder work in order to be able to go. Heaven's going to be it's just too, it can't be described. God himself couldn't do it in the book of Revelation. He could not describe the way, so man could understand how great heaven could be. He had to talk about in figurative language because it's just too great. And so I want to get there, and I think you do too. And so all these things we talked about, even though it's hard work, we're willing to pay that in order to be able to go to heaven. One other characteristic we didn't talk about is this path is a narrow path. Matthew 7:13 and 14. Jesus said, "Enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction. And those who enter by it are many, but the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few." So the question I have for you is, are you marching to Zion? If not, make the change. Change it tonight. Make sure that you are marching to Zion. Make sure that your life is right with God. Hey, I thank you for joining me this evening. If you are ever in the Kearney, Missouri area, look us up. We're at 406 North Clark. We meet every Sunday at 9:30 for Bible study, 10:30 for worship. And you can learn all about the church by going to kearneychurch.com. If you like this lesson, you want to hear more like it, tune to KPGZ 102.7 FM every Sunday morning at 7 a.m. Central Time, and you'll hear me preaching. If you can't pick up the signal, which I doubt you can if you're outside of Kearney, then just download their app. They have KPGZ has an app, and you can listen every Sunday morning to a lesson. Berean Spirits is an internet show I'm a part of with 2 other preachers, and we study a topic each week every Thursday at 10 a.m. Central Time. It's on Facebook and YouTube, and you can join in yourself by going to kearneychurch.com and pressing on the Berean Spirits app. Make comments in the comment section, and if they're good comments, we'll put them on the show, and we'll discuss it. But you can leave your questions and comments there, and if not, you can always watch an older copy. We leave all the old shows up so that you can still watch those. And Gospel Preaching Live and Berean Spirits is also on Spotify. So you can go to Google Podcast or Spotify and be able to listen to one of these shows. Okay, that's all I have for you. Looking forward, if the Lord allows, we'll come to you again this Thursday at 7 p.m. Until then, remember, this is the day the Lord has made. Let's rejoice in it and be glad.
This has been Gospel Preaching Live. Join us each week as truth is taught faith is examined and beliefs are challenged. Be sure and hit the like button so you can be notified of future episodes. And to watch past episodes, go to our website, kearneychurch.com. This has been a work of the Kearney Church of Christ.